All right, welcome back for World War II Part 2. So let's get started. Okay, so World War II Part 2. So hopefully you guys have been doing well, and we're gonna get started with this. So um, I have a couple essential questions this time around. So our essential questions are: what alliances and events contributed to the outbreak of World War II? What brought the United States into the war? How did countries mobilize for war? And how did Adolf Hitler's views on race influence the Holocaust? Okay, so if you need to, pause the video so you can write those down for your notes. Same plan as always, right? The essential questions will be on the test, so don't forget to make sure that those are in your notes. All right, so starting off, so last time we saw Hitler rise into power. Today, we're going to see things heat up a lot more. So Hitler will actually violate the Treaty of Versailles, which is what ended, that was at the end of World War One. So part of that agreement was that Germany could not have a military anymore, right? Because they didn't want Germany to grow in power and attack them again. So part of the Treaty of Versailles was to keep Germany from building a military and fighting back. So Hitler was the Chancellor of Germany, right? He was elected, he was appointed Chancellor. Germany wanted to revise, right, the treaty. They felt like they were unfairly punished with having to pay those war reparations, as well as other things that were going on. And so in March of 1935, Hitler announced the creation of a new air force, and a week later he passed a military draft to expand their army. Both of those things, the new air force and creating a draft to make a big army, were violations of the Treaty of Versailles, like directly. During this time, we also see a lot of new alliances pop up. So, specifically with Hitler in Germany, they're going to gain a lot of new allies. So, we have Mussolini in Italy and Francisco Franco of Spain in the Europe side of things. And then Japan will actually start working with Germany. They come up with this pact, this agreement, to promise each other to fight communism. And during this time as well, so this is where we have our Anschluss, which is the takeover of Austria. So that was one of like the topics that was an option for the World War II projects I gave you guys. And that one deals with like the musical The Sound of Music, right? Like that's like the movie and stuff. So that it's The Sound of Music is based off of Anschluss and the Trapp family singers, who were real people. So right, we have Germany, Italy, Japan, kind of Spain, and then on the other side, the United Kingdom, France, and they'll actually join up with the Soviet Union in a little bit, and then later we'll see the United States. So let's start with Japan. So in 1931, in September, Japan is going to disguise some of their soldiers and send them into part of China to blow up a section of the Manchurian Railway. Japan will actually go to war with China. They'll start fighting China. And Japan wanted to create what they call the New Asian Order. The United States, right, wasn't really happy with Japan attacking China. And so the United States threatened economic sanctions on Japan to try and stop them from, fighting China and growing in power. So once again, those essential questions, right? Think about number one, what alliances and events contributed to the outbreak of World War II. Right, so I just talked about a couple alliances. If you need to, go back, watch it again. So we're moving forward. There's a lot of stuff to cover today. Okay, so the Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg is actually, if you translate it from German, it means lightning war. So the Blitzkrieg, what it was is they would use armored columns, like rows, called panzer divisions that were supported by airplanes. Each division was a strike force about 300 tanks, with accompanying forces, meaning like soldiers and guns and all that. So we got planes, we got tanks, we got lots of soldiers, we got guns, right? And with this style of fighting, they can come in quickly and take over a lot of land area really fast, right? They're going to use Blitzkrieg to break through the Polish lines and encircle Polish troops. And after 4 weeks of starting to fight with Poland, Poland will surrender to Germany. In September of 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union actually divide up Poland. And a lot of people are were really upset about this for a lot of different reasons. Right, World War I was still pretty fresh in their minds. And Germany, right, they're still thinking of similar things, right? Germany in World War I, they wanted to invade France. Well, this time, they're going to do it. So some German panzer divisions will break through weak French defensive positions. This will surprise a lot of French and British forces, partly because, so there's this super heavily armed, barricaded line, essentially, right? And the British and the French were like heavily fortified, lots of soldiers there, lots of weapons there, and they're expecting Germany to come to there and fight them there, but the Germans actually just went around, which surprised them and leads to France getting invaded. Around that time, so Dunkirk's actually, there's a movie for it as well about it, but the Germans, right, so they split the Allied armies and trapped French troops and the entire British army on the beaches of Dunkirk, where all of these Allied soldiers are sitting ducks, right? They're out on the beach, out in the open. The Germans have an air force, they have planes. So, it's not good. The Royal Navy, which is the British Navy, goes to evacuate some of the troops, but it's not enough boats. And so a lot of British citizens will actually get on their own private fishing boats and go and help evacuate these troops. They'll end up evacuating just over 300,000 Allied troops from Dunkirk. So real quick, think about this. So why do you think the rescue at Dunkirk strengthened the British determination to fight Germany? So why would an evacuation, right, strengthen the British, right? Why would it do that? Think about that for a second. So moving on, so the Battle of Britain, Hitler realized that, so an amphibious invasion, which is where, he goes by sea and then they land and go on land. So an amphibious invasion could only succeed if they gain control of the air. So the Luftwaffe is the German Air Force. The Luftwaffe is going to launch a major offensive that bombed British cities. So part of this was to try and show the German strength, and really terrify the people of Britain. But because it wasn't the military areas that were being targeted, it actually made it so the British were able to rebuild their air strength really quickly and launch an offensive pretty quickly. but citizens were killed in the Battle of Britain. Everyday people. It wasn't just like soldiers. The targets weren't like landing strips and stuff like that. The Japanese offensive. So in the Pacific, right, Japan has been taking over more and more of China, taking over islands, but they hadn't really attacked the United States. Up until this point, the United States had remained neutral. The United States didn't join, and really didn't. A lot of people in the U.S. didn't want to join. But then Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. And there's actually a lot of other surprise attacks. We'll see Japan attack a lot of the Dutch East Indies, as well as like lots of islands in the Pacific. And because of Pearl Harbor, right, we see a bigger offense. Actually, I want to show you guys some of these. So here's some pictures, right? So Pearl Harbor was an American naval base on the Hawaiian island of Oahu. On December 7, 1941, Japanese fighter planes unexpectedly attacked the base, causing extensive damage to planes and ships and killing many American military personnel. This photograph, taken on December 7, 1941, shows the USS Shaw exploding after being bombed by Japanese airplanes. So we'll look at some other ones. So nearly 3,600 Americans, almost half of them military personnel, were killed or wounded during the attack on Pearl Harbor. Of those killed, almost half were crew members aboard the USS Arizona. And this actually compares, so the terrorist attack of September 11, 2001 was approximately 3,000, and about 1,800 people lost their lives when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans and the Gulf Coast in 2005. So really, it's a lot of people for all of those massive events. This is listed in order from strongest to weakest. The three most powerful types of ship in the U.S. Pacific Fleet were the battleship, the cruiser, and the destroyer. Of the more than 90 American ships stationed near Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 21 were damaged or destroyed in the Japanese attack. So right, lots of crazy going on there. Oh my goodness, Lucy. Alright, so here's your chance, right? If you're watching this on YouTube, comment below, why did the United States stay out of World War II until the Pearl Harbor attack? Why do you think, right? So take a minute, think about it, comment it below. Why did the United States stay out of World War II until the Pearl Harbor attack? Or, right, on the flip side too, like, why did we join after Pearl Harbor? What would make us want to join after the attack on Pearl Harbor? Go ahead, leave your comments below. And here's some more essential questions, right? Bringing them back up. So what brings the United States into the war? Because we weren't in the war, now we're in the war. And then we're going to look at how did the countries mobilize for war? Right, next. That's going to be the next thing. So we're going to look at different countries, some of the big players. So first is the Soviet Union. So Soviet Union, right, they're fighting Germany. And because Germany's coming so quickly, Soviet workers will actually dismantle or take down whole factories and ship the entire factory further inland to the country so that they can keep producing military supplies. Which, I don't know, I've always thought was super crazy. Soviet efforts to increase the production of tanks and other military equipment were successful. They actually did great this time around. So, shortages of food and housing. Unfortunately, because they were focusing so much on their military equipment, actually led to shortages of like food and buildings and stuff for the normal like citizens in the Soviet Union. So that's going to actually be a really big problem. And then the role of women. So the number of women working in industries in the Soviet Union increased sharply. So women were allowed to dig anti-tank ditches, and some women even fought in battles. right? So women are there, they're active, they're doing lots of things in the Soviet Union. In the United States, the United States is going to become the Allies' largest producer of military equipment. Workers who moved to the locations of new factories encountered a shortage of housing and schools. We'll actually see lots of women employed in munitions factories and other military establishments. So that's where you get like the Rosie Riveters and all that, with like women going. A riveter, I mean, you work in fact, you put in rivets. If you don't know what a rivet is, you should look it up. That's a pretty good thing to know. I don't know. I have pretty huge respect for like those women. My great grandma's actually Rosie. She was a riveter. She went and moved to Oakland to work in the shipyards there during World War II. Which is kind of crazy, right? African American migration. This is known as the Second Great Migration. So it's a movement of African Americans seeking jobs in industries. It'll lead to racial tensions. And a lot of them will move from the South, where there's like a lot of segregation left, like further north and further west. During this time, about 1 million African Americans will actually also join the military, where they're placed in segregated units. So they were allowed to serve, but they still remained segregated because of all those racial tensions. There's also other racial tensions within the United States. So on the West Coast, mostly, many Japanese Americans were held in internment camps, even if they were born in the United States. So if your parents are Japanese, but you were born here in the United States, you would still be sent to those camps. Oftentimes these camps were surrounded by barbed wire, living conditions were really poor, people were packed in there, sickness spread, and there's a lot of things like having them like work, like a work camp, trying to get education to these people and all that kind of stuff. There's actually a Japanese internment camp in Utah, out near Delta, which if you've ever been out there it feels like the absolute middle of nowhere. So these are some pictures. The buildings actually are not there anymore. They tore them all down, but the roads are still there. So if you go out there, there's just like a bunch of roads in like a grid pattern in the middle of the desert. Right, so here's a picture of what it would have looked like. I'm up here, right? Welcome to Topaz City. So, right, that's something that was here in Utah. There was also internment camps in like Idaho as well. So a lot of people who lived on the coast in California were shipped all the way out here to be in these camps. And after the people got back, right, and got back to their homes and stuff, oftentimes they had a really hard time finding jobs because the racism, the racial tension was still there. So Germany, even though they're the ones who started it, they were pretty slow to get to that full economic mobilization. They wanted to avoid the collapse of the home front that they experienced during World War I, and so rather than like rationing bread like really fast and stuff, Hitler was actually really slow to cut the production of consumer goods. But only when the Allies started to really win did he order a total mobilization of the economy, which was like, let's open more factories for like guns and stuff, let's close down schools, let's close down theaters, cafes, stuff like that. Now we're gonna focus everything towards the war. With women, right, so we have lots of men going off to war, but what's interesting is the numbers of German women contributing to the war did not increase much. So there's a lot of kind of attitudes that women couldn't do stuff, women couldn't help work, or they shouldn't go help work, or they should stay home, that kind of stuff. Mobilization of Japan. So initially, right, they're really mobilized, they're ready to go, lots of stuff. The government controlled the prices, wages, labor, and resources. So when the government wanted to go to war, they had everything ready to go. There's a call for civilian sacrifices. So there's like lots of traditions for obedience and hierarchy that the Japanese government used to encourage citizens to make sacrifices for the national cause. That included volunteering to become kamikaze, like pilots and stuff. Reluctance to mobilize women. So few women took jobs that directly contributed to war efforts. Instead, needed laborers were brought from other countries, most of the time unwillingly. Okay, there's those essential questions popping up again. Make sure you have how did countries mobilize for war. So you have like the different countries and maybe a couple things for each. So we also see in World War II lots of bombings of cities. So we'll see long-range bombers developed after World War I. Britain will be under the Blitz, which means they're going to be like heavily bombed. British morale actually remains pretty high. They're sending around lots of posters. There's lots of like community things like get people together and keep them happy. The British will actually move millions of children to rural areas and even to other countries to protect them during the German Blitz. So like in C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, like the Narnia movies, right? How the kids have to go out to the countryside, out of the city because of the bombings, right? So that would be during this time. Effects of the Allied bombing of Germany. So the British conducted major bombing raids on German cities. Dresden will be crazy bombed and demolished with firebombs. That one's actually pretty interesting. If any of you ever have the chance to go to Dresden, it's really fascinating. So the main cathedral in Dresden was completely blown up, but after the war they went and took a picture of where all the bricks were and like labeled them, and then they actually figured out like where the bricks would have gone originally in the cathedral, and they rebuilt the cathedral with like the bricks it was once made out of plus like some new bricks because obviously some were destroyed. But so it's kind of interesting because you see like this, I should put a picture in here. You see this like white cathedral and then there's like black bricks, you know, that are like older and part of like the original cathedral. But yeah, Dresden is crazy bombed, huge losses. And then the U.S. will have air raids on Japan. So towards the end of the war, because a lot of their air force had been destroyed, U.S. starts bombing Japan more and more. Moving on to the Holocaust. So the Holocaust starts because of racism. So Hitler blamed the Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I and for the Great Depression. The Nazis called for a final solution, which was the extermination of the Jewish people. Einsatzgruppen is a special strike force meant to like round up the Polish Jews, and then they'd move the Polish Jews to ghettos, which is like, you know, worst parts of the city that are super overcrowded, and tried to starve them to death. But a lot of the Jews organized and fought back. And during this time, so this group also used mobile units to round up Soviet Jews and execute them on the spot. We also see a rise in death camps by this group, so they begin to build special camps to speed up the killing of Jews. By 1942, the Nazis packed Jews into trains and transported them to 6 extermination centers in Poland. The largest was Auschwitz. 30% of those rounded up were forced to work, while the rest were killed with poison gas. The death toll, so about 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazis. more than 3 million of them in death camps, another 9 million non-Jewish people, for example, the Roma or Gypsies, and leading citizens of countries the Nazis conquered were put to death. 4 million slave laborers died, and more than 3 million Soviet prisoners will also die. Many Jews fought back against the Nazis, and a lot of countries like Denmark helped to save the Jews by issuing them exit visas, which allowed them to leave. Friends and strangers also hid Jews or smuggled them to safe areas. If you haven't read The Diary of Anne Frank, I highly recommend it. It's a tearjerker, but it's really good. And it talks about her experiences having to hide and then being sent to the camp and that. Denial and collaboration. What's really kind of crazy is, you think it's did everyone in Germany, were they okay with this whole genocide, killing all these people? And the fact is, a lot of people refuse to believe that it was happening. They didn't know, or they thought it was fake and just rumors. Others pretended they didn't know about the Holocaust. Either they pretended or they really didn't know. And then others assisted the Nazis. What's also fascinating, so there's actually a work camp in what's now Czech Republic, where they built this kind of nice looking town, right? And they made a video saying oh, look, this is where we're sending all the Jews and it's so nice. But in reality, it was super overcrowded, lots of people were dying, lots of sickness, it was way terrible. Right, but all the German citizens were just seeing these little short clips and stuff of oh, look how nice it is, we're sending them to a nicer place, kind of a thing. The Allies will concentrate on ending the war, and did little about the death camps until after Germany's surrender. So while they're fighting the wars, they're not focused on the death camps. So D-Day, so a massive force of Allied troops left Britain on D-Day. They'll land and invade Normandy in France. Lots of movies depict D-Day. That's where you have, the boats pulling up and then people hopping out into the water and then raiding the beaches with lots of barbed wire, lots of gunfire. The Nazis will respond slowly with reinforcements, which will ruin their chances of foiling the invasion. In 3 months, the Allies built up their forces and created a massive second front in Europe. Paris will end up being liberated in August 1944. The Allies will push eastward towards Germany. Germans will have a counteroffensive at the Battle of the Bulge, and it'll fail in 1945. And then from there, the Allied forces will just flow across western borders of Germany, right? Take over parts of Germany. In the Pacific, so U.S. President Harry Truman, who had become the leader of the United States after FDR died in April 1945, was afraid that an invasion of Japan would cost many more U.S. soldiers their lives. So rather than invading Japan, Truman ordered that atomic bombs be dropped on Japanese cities. Truman hoped that using the bombs would cause Japan to surrender. In August of 1945, atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Tens of thousands of people, mostly civilians, died from radiation poisoning or from the blast itself. So right, even if you didn't die from the initial blast, being that close to an atomic bomb blast would cause cancer, lots of radiation problems. And there are those essential questions again. Okay, so think about it, make sure you write those down. And yeah. So once again, if you guys have questions, please email me, and I'll try and get to you as soon as I can. If you're in my A-Day class, I hope you guys have a great weekend. And if you're in my B-Day class, remember that it's Tuesday that you need to be watching this. Anyway, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later.